Think about it.
The meeting is called to order. Let's all stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Lois, can you read the statement of certification of the meeting?
Certification of meeting has been advertised according to Sunshine Law.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Vanilla.
Here.
Mr. Seelig.
Here.
Mrs. Inaugurato.
Here.
Councilman Kennedy. Mr. Conti.
Here.
Mr. Walsh.
Here.
Mrs. Shaw. Here. Mr. Corvo.
Here.
Mr. Bowe.
Here.
Mr. Sanabria. Ms. Rico.
Here.
Mr. Harrods.
Here.
Mr. DiBiase.
Here.
Mr. DiLorenzo.
Can I have a motion for the approval of the minutes for the January 11th, 2018 meeting?
So moved.
Second. Lois, call the roll.
Mr. Venero.
Yes.
Mr. Seelig.
Yes.
Mrs. Inaugurato.
Yes.
Mr. Conti.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw.
Take no part.
Mr. Corvo.
Yes.
Mr. Bowe.
Yes.
Ms. Rico.
Yes.
Chairman's comments, just reminding our newer members, mandatory training. Mr. Corvo has a list of some upcoming events. If anybody like, they could see him, the location and times. Correspondence and payment of bills. Anybody have any questions or comments? If not, under old business, we have the memorialization for the extension of 630 Washington Avenue for the preliminary site plan approval. Lois, can you call the roll on that?
Yes. Mr. Venero.
Yes.
Mrs. Inaugurato.
Yes.
Mr. Conti.
Yes.
Mr. Seelig.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw.
Yes.
Mr. Corvo.
Yes.
Mr. Bowe.
Yes.
Ms. Rico.
Yes.
Under old business, we have public hearing on the updated master plan and amended zoning ordinance.
Good evening, board. Do I need to be sworn?
Yes, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you out?
I do.
Please state your name.
Donald myself. Good evening, everyone. I can see some new faces, so I'll just backtrack a little bit. I was looking over my notes that our firm, CME, introduced master plan amendments, which are mandated by law every 10 years, to this board back in September. So the document has been out there for several months for you to review and for the public to comment on. So back in December, we did have our first public hearing on the contents of this master plan. And I remember being up here for about 2 hours. And we answered questions, every question that we could. And then the subcommittee that has met on this topic for several occasions met again. It would be the chair, Ms. Shore, Mr. Conte, Mr. DiLorenzo, and myself. And what I'd like to do is read the contents of that memo. We met very quickly after the public meeting in December. And I just want to read the contents of that to you. This is what was discussed in a broader room and then more in quiet. I should also recognize that Malvika Apte from our office is here. She was here to answer questions back in December. She's here to answer questions again. So basically what happened is that the five of us met. I wrote a letter dated December 29th, which you should have. You'll recall there was a lot of discussion about half bathrooms, full bathrooms, 70 feet, and it was decided that the language was confusing and unnecessary. So we agreed en masse to just take that proposed change to the ordinance out. The Finkelstein property, or the Kidda property as it's referred to, is a 20-some acre tract. It's currently zoned MXD, which is a mixed-use zone. The recommendation is that that parcel, which is all one lot, be changed to planned retail light residential. The real underlying recommendation is that it be designated a redevelopment zone. And you'll be told by members of the board that have been here for a while that that attempt had been made previously. It is our recommendation that it be revisited and you look at that again as a redevelopment area. We We talked about creating a school overlay zone. In other words, a lot of your schools in Belleville have a zoning that is residential or it doesn't coincide with the use. We discussed possibly creating an overlay zone and decided to just maintain the status quo for the time being. We did endorse the concept of the open space zone, so there is an open space zone now that's proposed. And keep in mind that is just a zoning classification. It doesn't have anything to do with anything else. It's saying that the property that's there is zoned open space. We're not conducting any inventories or trying to determine anything else from that zoning classification. So there was a little bit of confusion there. Basically, the Washington Avenue corridor, which has been a point of discussion going back to 2005 in master plans and re-exam subsequently, the recommendation is that most of Washington Avenue be rezoned to BG, and the issue there was density. We stuck with the recommendation of up to 40 units per acre. We should note that there is a conditional use that can be granted in that zone for up to 8 stories, I think is what it was, or was it 80 units, Frank? Which one is it? 80 units or 8 stories? 8 stories. So you can go up if you have if you meet conditions that are already in the ordinance. And then one other minor recommendation that was made had to do with site plan approval. If you make a modification to a certain structure, instead of a 2,500 minimum threshold, the threshold is increased to 5,000 square feet before having to go through all the extra paperwork that's involved. And again, so I'm not sure at what's, again, this is a public hearing on the master plan. I don't know how you want to proceed, but that was the task that I took back in December and was to meet with the subcommittee, to clarify the recommendations based on public input. That's what I've done. And what we're asking for, what I think the next step in the process is for you to make a recommendation to council, because they're the ones that have to sign off on the master plan recommendations as they've been submitted. Is that correct, Councilor?
Yes, sir. Does any members have any questions?
When we looked at the Kitty, I think the C, whatever rezoning property, we clearly indicated the commercial and some residential only because to really, obviously anything industrial is grandfathered in, but in discussion with the idea that there is a school in close proximity, that we have to be sensitive to, we really need to be sensitive to the idea that we need to be vigilant in our warehousing and our industry in that area. To make it painful for anyone who's there, but anything, because that school is literally, what, almost within a block so of that property.
Very close. Any other members, questions or comments? Laura?
I just want to start with some housekeeping. Your list of the council and the planning board need to be updated.
It'll be outdated by now, yes.
Personnel who are in place and one who is no longer here.
Okay.
That's all I have, just a comment.
No more members have any questions. At this time, we'd open it up to the public for any questions or comments of this witness. Mr. Frank Antoni?
Yeah, first we were unable to hear Ms. Short's comments.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What was it?
My apologies. Is it in relationship to the fact that Mr. Shelton had brought up school zone? And as a former member of Board of Ed and knowing what schools, where the rest of the schools are located, and discussing Kitty with redevelopment, industrial within close proximity of that school would certainly be questionable. Where clean commercial retail would be fine. But to designate that, when you really look at it, there's simply literally a small lot. And in fact, there's that brick wall that simply separates it. And in
Which
general,
property? Yeah,
I know I'm going to bring up the one thing, just
Which
if
property we talking about though now?
we're talking
Kidder site.
School 9, Kidder site.
All right, the Walter Kitty site.
Yeah, because that school, right now, we're sure that, we can't assume, but hopefully, even the warehousing that we have in that area, not that we shouldn't have it, but we need to be more vigilant in the future because of the fact that we need a school in there. But at the same time, we have to be careful about the type of development we have, because we certainly wouldn't want an industrial situation that could negatively affect the general environment for school and the school children. And that was my concern.
So you're supporting residential on the Kitty
I'm,
site?
no, Mr. Frantantoni, I'm supporting anything that will generally develop that area, and if residential, mixed-use residential becomes part of it, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I'm certainly not pushing. If we could get something that was retail or clean commercial of any sort, a clean warehousing, we would be more than welcome, and that's what we want. If we had a major company that came in and wanted to use that as an office campus or as a distribution campus, we would all want that. It would bring jobs in, and it would be good for the community. So I would love to see something like that, but at the the situation that I personally as a board member feel is that that land continues to remain fallow, and hopefully for the benefit of this community, we will develop into something, but I think we've got to be careful that it's not, quote, industrial.
Well, I don't want to see retail down there. And in regards to your comments, I'm sure you know the history of Belleville.
You're going to make
The
a
entire
comment.
valley.
Mr. Frantantoni, are you going to make a comment now or just ask questions?
I'm making my comment.
Okay, we just have to swear you in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Your name and address?
Vincent Frantantoni, 129 Mount Prospect Avenue, Belleville.
Thank you.
There's been no problem. Mike's 52 years in Belleville, 51 exactly. The School 9 has been down there in the middle of much more densely populated industrial, commercial, manufacturing. You've got Work-alike that was big at one time, manufacturing and what. We never had a problem with the school down there. It's coexisted well with them and all. Now to go down there, on Main Street, the Walter Kitty site, I keep bringing to here, I keep bringing articles to the town council, all over the state, warehousing due to online shopping, demand is big for it down there. We've got to push it. If we keep pushing residential, that's what you're going to get. I don't think it should be in the master plan. We got to put it's all over the state. Warehousing is great, and it's a clean business, the Belleville and all that.
It's a clean business if you know what's in the warehouse. It's not necessarily clean if we're not vigilant. It's not that we had something like an Amazon, which by the way though, we have to really look at things like Amazon because Amazon has had some negative effects in Robbinsville, if you're familiar with the situation. But Mr. Frantantoni, clean warehousing is wonderful. The fact that we already have industrial sites down there, that's grandfathered. It's not necessarily wonderful. We don't know what all those sites have or don't have in proximity to those children and those families. So that's why I think that we need to, down the road, we need to tighten up our warehousing regulations. And also, when we do take into account warehousing or distribution sites, since we've always talked about the fact that there's a tremendous amount of congestion in this town, I will bring into account the familiarity with Robbinsville, and it has a warehousing distribution site, and understand that there are certain things that are great about it, and there are certain things that are definite issues as far as mobility and the fact that our road structure in this town does not provide an easy flow. But I'm not pushing for residential, but as a board member, I would not exclude it, because I'm just as open to warehousing, and I'm not opposed to retail.
Well, continue to address the board. And I thank you, Ms. Shore, for saying our road structure is unbelievably problematic in this town. And in case some of you board members don't understand, if you lived in Belleville, you'd be aware there's no way to get east and west through Belleville except Rollman Street and Belleville Avenue. We can't get out. I live on Mount Prospect Avenue. In the last 5 years, it's impossible in the morning and afternoon to get out of my street into Belleville Avenue. It's a train. Both directions, it's a train. And part of it is due to redevelopment in other towns. Our neighbors in Bloomfield, all them homes from up there. Go up Belleville Avenue. My wife has to go 3 days a week. She babysits in Roseland for my daughter's kids there. If she don't get out by 6:45 onto Belleville Avenue, she can't get out. Originally, 5 years ago, that was a 20-minute trip to Roseland. It's now 45 minutes to an hour. Most of it is going up Belleville Avenue to get up there. Right over the Parkway, you go right over the Parkway Bridge and you make a right, that little street, they called it now Memorial Drive, they put another light there to get into that thousands of units that they built in Bloomfield over there. You can't get in there. 2 weeks ago, I went up to go to a job in Montclair and all that. I get there, the light's green. But the car in front of me couldn't go. Because there's a light a couple hundred feet up at the Parkway Drive, whatever it's
Mr.
called there.
Frantantoni, could you make the point? I mean, we all know
Yeah,
there's
this is
traffic.
the point.
Everybody up here knows there's traffic in
This
town.
is the master plan, and we're supposed to be planning properly.
Well, whatever plan
For the
comes before the
future.
kitty property has to come before us. So, I mean, we're really not specifically saying what's going there. Any
Correct.
plan
Well,
that comes has to come before us.
I'm addressing, we don't need any more residential in Belleville.
Okay.
Our 36,000 residents are jammed into 2 square miles, you know, and we can't move. Our road structure, thank you, Ms. Short, acknowledging that, cannot support it. Next week, you're going to see real disaster. I don't know if you're aware, they're going to close Mill Street to replace a bridge there. You're going to see gridlock in this town. Because everybody comes down Montgomery Street, you got to go down to Belleville Avenue. You come down Belleville Avenue, everything goes to Belleville Avenue. And then our council makes home blower one way, so everybody has to go to Belleville Avenue. There's no good thinking in this town. So we do not need, the point on that is we don't need any more residential. And as planning board members, I hope you take this into account because, you know, I've been coming to meetings for 50 years and I see nothing. And thanks to Mr. Mizell, he brought up the 2007, 2009 master plan. We don't even fulfill what we planned. You go look at all the stuff that, you know, for example, the light at Geraldman and Franklin Avenue. 10 years ago, we had a problem with that area. It had to be reconfigured and put new lighting. We don't do it in this town. So, please, that's the one thing. We don't need any more residential anywhere. And in regards to Washington Avenue, Mr. Mizell, now the whole area, all Washington Avenue is going to be one zone, right?
That's correct. Primarily, yes.
All 8-story?
No. 8-story is a conditional use, it's already on the ordinance.
All right, that was approved 35, 40 years ago.
Some time ago, correct.
If I recall, it's from Mill Street to Belleville and from Graylock to the Nutley Water.
No, Ben, that was 2007 they approved that.
All right, but that's the only area, the two
Yeah, it was
ends.
the north and south and a couple blocks.
All right, well, what are we doing with the, we're making all one zone now, I thought, Washington Avenue.
Yeah, that's why it's continuing from the north line to the Nutley line, the BJ. In between, there wasn't.
All right, so is 8 stories going to be allowed?
As a
As a
conditional use.
conditional use.
Like it is still, that hasn't changed.
That hasn't changed, right?
And are we going to go to 50 units or leave it the way it is, 40 and 50 as a conditional?
The subcommittee recommended 50. That was originally what was proposed.
Well, I don't think it's, first of all, it's many, many years that we allowed 8-story.
8 stories is
And I think some developers realize it's not practical for Washington, that's why it hasn't been built yet. In regards to the open space plan here, is the cemetery property, the original plan, considered that as part of open space?
It's being zoned for open space or as open space.
Well, that again, planning board members, you can't consider that open space. Open space, most people understand it, well, I can take my kids or my grandkids, or people can go biking, or people can go relaxing and all that. You can't do it in a cemetery. So why designate a cemetery as open space that we can't use? Because then what's going to happen, when the county and when we look at different things, how many open space a Belleville will have, we're going to have a false number because we're including the cemetery as open space. Open space should only be considered for recreational space. So please, you planning board, take the cemetery out. That's not open space. Any of you folks go riding and biking and enjoying your children and grandchildren in the cemetery? That is not open space. I beg you, do some responsible planning as a planning board and eliminate that. The cemeteries in Belleville, which we have quite a bit of acreage in there, that is not open space. And the other one, you've got a lot there, I think it's on Princeton Terrace there. That one that, it's one family zone. Are we still leaving that in to be considered multifamily?
Yes.
All right, that's, I think you had testimony at the last meeting, there's a water line and a gas line under there. I said, that can't be built on. You're going to destroy a nice one-family neighborhood if you allow that to do that. There was already an application before, I don't know, it was the planning board or the zoning board years ago, to build multifamily, and it was rejected because of the problems with that site. So don't do the developer a favor by changing the master plan where he can walk right in and do something that's really not practical for it. And what about basement
Took the wording out.
bathrooms?
The proposed wording has been removed.
Okay. I thank you, but please, your planners, some of you are new, this has been going on for years. Belleville's going downhill because of poor planning. Let's do the right thing this time.
I wonder if we could just direct ourselves to the cemetery issue. As a planner, why are cemeteries considered open spaces?
Again, I tried to remedy this before we started. It's simply a zoning classification for this particular type of use. What I've seen happen in towns over and over again is the zoning for cemeteries can be anywhere from residential to a multitude of different classifications. So this is purely an attempt to try and make the zoning such that it reflects what's actually there. It's all it is.
But I think Mr. Frantantoni is raising the issue that if the county were to come in and for whatever reason, some sort of funding, which would probably be the issue, how would that impact us?
I'm not really sure. Malvika?
May I, just to alleviate, I mean, like Mr. Meisel said, that's just to zone the area. When we are counting an open space, it's generally in an open space plan where an entire inventory of the lands are done. And cemetery is not counted, of course, as an open space or recreation. open spaces only be counted what are passive recreation, which would be trails and any kind of, passive activity areas, and active recreation, which would be your fields, soccer fields, or swimming areas and things like that.
I don't want to belabor this, but I think that this is, we know that cemeteries are there for centuries because bodies are protected by law. So to have that in an open space area is truly theoretical from here to Mars. I just don't see that ever happening.
Well, one way sometimes some towns do classify as open space because open space zoning classification is more restrictive. That kind of zone would not allow any kind of development in that, and which is what, these naturally protected areas and, your passive recreation areas, active recreation areas would want to be in that kind of zone, where you don't allow any kind of development, and that's really the reason why cemetery would be put in.
My final question, would there be any negative impact to remove cemeteries from that category?
Yes and no. I mean, if you remove it, it would fall under whatever classification it probably is in.
It will fall under a cemetery classification.
You don't have a zone for that, but you
Yeah.
certainly could
Well,
create
maybe we
one.
should look at that.
You could do that.
To do that and put it under, or just to, if it stays under open space zone, it just stays as an.
The idea is to restrict activity. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the bottom line. That's
Any
all
kind
we're
of
trying to do here. The other locations that we reference in the plan relative to open space, Branch Brook Park, Belleville Park, Hendricks Fields, Forest Hill Field Club, Glendale Cemetery, Newark Reservoir property, and other parks and open spaces. That's what falls under your definition of what constitutes open space.
I know, excuse me. I know you mentioned the Newark Reservoir. Again, that is owned by Newark, is completely fenced off and with no trespassing signs. So don't we have the same problem? It's open space, but there's no availability to use it.
There's no access to it.
There's no access.
Again, all I can say is a zoning classification that's restrictive.
All right, it'll be a
That is
fact
the
question.
intent.
It'll be a fact question for the board members to make a decision.
But certainly cemeteries, zoning cemeteries as cemeteries is a good idea. It just adds another classification to your zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
Anybody else in the public?
Mike Michelle, 47 Flood Street. One question and then two comments. At the beginning of his remarks tonight, Mr. Mizell was talking about the new density for the BG zone on Washington. If I heard him correctly at that point, maybe he misspoke, but I thought you said 40 units.
50.
It's 5, it's 5, sorry, I just want to make sure that's
Yes.
clear, because I thought I heard you say 40 instead of 50. It is 50.
It's 50,
It is
correct.
50, all right. In regard to the open space calculation, I think it is actually very disingenuous, never mind the cemeteries, but to include Hendricks Field, the golf course, in that calculation. That's not public space. In order to use that, you have to pay membership and greens fees. So you can make the similar argument that Hendricks Field is not truly technical space. You can't take your kids there to go, as Vinny said, to go biking or walking, or your dog's there. That's not really open space, and it really is somewhat misleading to say that that should be included in the township's calculation.
That's not what we're proposing. We're not asking that
But
this
it is,
be
right,
included in the
Hendricks Field is
calculation.
listed
For the
Hendricks
record,
as
though,
part
because
of.
you're making comments, let's
All right,
just swear it in.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. But just a moment ago, Mr. Mizell listed Hendricks Field as one of the assets included in the open space calculation. And my argument is...
Sir, not the open space calculation, in the zoning classification. The open space calculation, again, in the master plan we referenced, there should be, according to certain estimates, about 300 acres of open space for Belleville residents. You technically have about 61.
Actually,
So if you
27.
use that calculation, yes, you're under the threshold that you'd like to be for Belleville-owned public space. Let's make it clear, this is a zoning classification. The golf courses are zoned open space because that's primarily what they are to the naked eye. They're open, they're not being heavily populated with many uses. But it's not, we're not trying to count any of this zone for open space in our open space calculation. Okay, and that's why Malvika is very good at, and well-versed at explaining that, but I needed to speak up because it's not what we're talking about, zoning versus the open space calculation, two different things.
As I pointed out at the last meeting, when you look at the numbers going into the actual amount of open space that Belleville currently has, and I offered to send any of you the report if you'd like, the Essex County Open Space Master Plan, we should have, for our population, as Mr. Mizell just said, about 300 acres. In fact, we have only 27, or 27 acres.
That's including Belleville Park and Branchburg Park?
That's including the whatever spaces, I'll send you that report, Mr. Venero, if you'd
That
like to
doesn't
see
sound
it.
right, 20-something acres.
15 of those acres, according to the Essex County's calculation, they have the whole table there in the report. 15 of those 27 acres are from the municipal field, the municipal stadium. So mostly we have very little usable space as far as Essex County is concerned. Again, if you'd like to see the report, I'll send it to you later tonight. The other comment I'd like to make is the decision on the part of the planning board to not have a special school overlay district. As I tried to argue at the last meeting, school property does not belong to the township. It belongs to the Board of Education. And I think it would be appropriate to finally differentiate that fact in law, codify the fact that the schools are not amenable to residential development or any other type of development. I don't quite understand this argument that by example of school number 9, if we were to recognize the school number 9 property as a school zone, how that could possibly affect any of the other development down the road for the valley. If Kitty gets developed, that has nothing to do with school number 9. All I'm asking is that for once in the history of Belleville, we recognize that our 7 elementary schools, our middle school, and our high school are separate, unique entities and should be singled out from any other development that's taking place in the township. So again, I ask you to reconsider. Thousands of other communities throughout the United States have special school overlay zones, but Belleville decides not to do that, and I don't understand the rationale for it. All I'm asking you is to finally recognize that the schools are separate and have nothing to do with the township and are not subject to any type of development. Again, I don't see how making such a recognition would have any impact on the development of Kitty or any of the surrounding properties. So I'd like you to think about that a little bit more before you take your vote, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else in the public? Mr. Delgertia?
Tilio Jerry Delgertia. You might as well swear me in because it's probably going to be testimony.
What else?
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes, I do. There's only 2 parts of this master plan that I have a problem with. One is the property on Princeton Terrace that, and I asked Mr. Hurwitz, you can swear him in, and ask him if he didn't tell me this, because he wasn't sure last month or 2 months ago when we had the hearing. There is a gas line that goes with the water lines through there, okay? And I can tell you from the hearings we went through, I believe around 40% of that property cannot be built on. To make it from a 1-family to a multi-family, which would allow 13 units on the property, in my opinion, is asinine. Because you're looking to put 13 units only on 60%, but you're basing this on the whole lot, 1.1 acre, okay? But a good 40% can't be built on. Now, there is a 2-family there. It's currently listed as a 1-family zone. 2-family there. I already testified, I have no problem with it being changed to a 2-family zone. It would also allow, I believe, at least 2 more 2-family houses to be built on the property with no problem. So you would end up with 3 2-family homes on that property. And that's the only thing I have a problem with. The second thing is, he is making recommendations, and I don't believe the planning board is the place to make recommendations for areas in need of redevelopment. Number one, that's usually sent to the, parcel is listed, it's sent by the council to your board. Your board then has a public hearing to determine if it meets the requirements of an area in need of redevelopment. So how could you recommend making an area need a redevelopment in certain spots of the town when you didn't even have a hearing to figure out if it's even eligible, if it meets the requirements. That is ridiculous. Mr. Venero looks confused.
Yeah, I'm not, what property are you talking about?
Specifically, he mentioned in the master plan, and there may be more because he told me there's more. The corner, I'm not sure what the side street, Hollis, and Franklin Avenue. It's the last corner on Franklin Avenue and the Nutley line.
Hilton, Jack.
Hilton?
Hilton Street.
Hilton Street, okay, now we got the right one. How could you recommend this when it even hasn't been sent to you by the council to make that recommendation? And you don't even know if it meets the requirements for an area needed redevelopment. Plus, an area needed redevelopment takes the place of what used to be called the blighted area before. And to call that area, which is prime real estate, you're talking about right on the Nutley line, for it to be considered blighted, could lower everybody's property values in the town where the property values are the highest in town. It's ridiculous. Shouldn't even be put in there. And that's all, the only two complaints I have with the whole thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else in the public have a question or comment? Not at this time. We'll close the public portion. Gerard?
Just one comment. Mr. Mazel.
Yes.
The open space zone, as opposed to actual open space which can be used in the open space calculation, is there any way we can slightly change the name of the zone so this confusion isn't there?
Certainly. What do you think?
Yeah, that could also be done. Another way of...
I don't think we've sworn you in,
Yes,
have we? Let's
sorry.
do that.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
And please state your name for the record.
Maldika Apte, last name A-P-T-E, CME Associates, Howell, New Jersey.
Thank you.
We can definitely do that. Another way of probably characterizing each unit is conducting something called an open space plan study, which would be another consideration that could be done, in which you could classify the recreation sites, the passive recreation, active recreation, and give a different zoning to cemetery or these kind of restricted uses, call it some other name.
Yeah, just something so that, this confusion that we're having between what is open space, which can be actively used, as opposed to cemetery being open space. I'm not going to take my grandkids there for a picnic.
Yeah, and again, the planning board can make the recommendations. At the end of the day, the governing body can decide how they want to proceed, whether they want to keep this zoning classification or they want to change the zoning classification and call it some other name and then go ahead and adopt it.
Can you offer a name?
I'm sure the planning board can make recommendations.
He wants a name from you.
Oh, from me?
Yeah.
Well, you should.
Yeah. I liked open space, but that's not going to fly.
No, it's too
Too general.
ambiguous, too general, has different meanings to different people.
Certainly, that could be the recommendation, to be something else. Again, council is the one that has to weigh in on this, but you certainly, we can come up with a name, I would think.
Restricted development or
Sorry. But to bring this back to concrete, you're now asking the board to adopt the amendments to the master plan.
Well, we're saying these are the recommendations that are out there.
Is there a summation you'd like to make, or are you done?
Gosh, Dean, you want to make the summation for me? You're an attorney.
So you've heard,
Yeah.
for the record, my name is Dean.
Okay, hold on one second.
Just one question. I have a question.
Yes.
The area of needs development.
Okay.
Just how many are we talking about are in this plan?
How many are in the plan?
Right,
Apparently
because
the
Mr.
one that was
Gershio
referenced.
alluded that there was a lot more, and I didn't see
The
that.
only one that I can recall is the Kidda site. That is a recommendation among the 19 that are made, that be reconsidered as an area in need of redevelopment. You've already designated it as one. You made the
Right.
recommendation, and we're saying, go back, make the recommendation again, and take a look at
That is
this
the
area.
only one here. Why is he speaking of Hilton Street?
Because apparently there's reference to the one in Hilton Street as being an area in need of down the road. Yep, it just says to conduct a study to see if it meets the criteria. It doesn't say do it, it says conduct a study. Those are the only two locations.
All right, so how many studies are we doing in this plan besides that one?
The recommendation is to conduct a needs study for this property that we've been talking about and to re-examine the Kidda site and conduct a needs study there as well. What happened in the 10 years since these studies were done is you now have something called a non-condemnation redevelopment zone. So when they changed the word blighted and took that out and used other language, another thing they've done is you no longer have to say you're going to condemn and take property at fair market value. So, you know, again, if you're asking me as your planner what to recommend, that's what I would recommend you pursue for the Kidda site, for both sites actually.
Kidda site and Hilton. Okay. Are there any other sites you're recommending?
No.
Why
Those are
was it
the two.
alluded to that there were many other ones?
Well, in the language, again, in the recommendation, it says use redevelopment as a tool to do different things in your community. So, for example, you just approved the redevelopment area, the old Pathmark. That's a redevelopment zone. There are other areas that you can look at and say, does this qualify or not? Because the end result is it is an incentive for redevelopment and for the developers that invest the money. But you have many areas in town that you should consider because the criteria lends itself to creating redevelopment areas. And again, the key difference between 10 years ago and now, there's not a condemnation take property requirement.
I just wanted to clarify that I do know there's 2 in the report, but it seemed like there was more recommendations that I didn't.
It's a general overall recommendation that you use redevelopment, the tools that have been beefed up and offered to cities, and consider them as you move forward.
Thank you.
Council?
So, very briefly, Joe, I'll introduce myself. I'm Dean Donatelli. I'm Special Redevelopment Counsel for the township. And you've heard the testimony of Mr. Mizell. And as he mentioned, statutorily, the town is required every 10 years to examine their master plan. They've made recommendations to the planning board, which is the body that governs the master plan. The action that would be taken by the board tonight is a resolution adopting the amendment to the master plan. One other thing that CME did is make recommendations to the governing body as to how these ideas in the master plan would be implemented by way of zoning ordinances, which, as you know, begins at the council, comes back to the planning board, and then goes back to the council for adoption. That's the charge tonight.
Thank you, Dean, for helping.
I think we'd like to make a motion to move forward with this, but there's 2 conditions we'd like to add. One is to the wording for the cemetery, take the open space wording out of it and come up with better wording for it. And the second, if all the members agree, I think we'd like to remove that Princeton Terrace, remove that.
That rezoning classification?
That rezoning classification.
And leave it as
those
is?
2 issues.
Okay.
And I think proceed with your recommendation.
That would move it forward. I would say that's an excellent idea.
Yes.
So I guess we need a motion
I'll make the motion.
to approve these recommendations of the updated master plan to send to our council with the 2 stipulations. We just
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Lois, call the roll.
Mr. Manero.
Yes.
Mrs. Inaugurato.
Yes.
Mr. Conti.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mrs. Shore.
Yes.
Mr. Corbo.
Yes.
Mr. Bowe.
Yes.
Ms. Rico.
Yes.
Council, you and I will make some changes to this and we'll do it next week, okay?
At this time, we're going to take a brief 5-minute recess, and when we come back, I'm going to recuse myself from the next thing on the agenda here, as I have a conflict.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot, Dean, but thank you.
and consent to the redevelopment plan ordinance. Mayor and council adopted amendments to the Roche Diagnostic redevelopment plan for 11 Franklin Avenue. Council?
Good evening again. Again, for the record, my name is Dean Donatelli. I'm with the firm of Feliciano Webster, which is Scotland Taylor. We are the Special Redevelopment Council for the Township of Belleville. This property, as was mentioned by the Vice Chair, is a Roche Diagnostic site, 11 Franklin Avenue. It's for the newer members of the board. In 2013, there was an original redevelopment plan adopted for a mixed-use development for one lot. And it was amended in 2016. The redevelopment plan was amended in 2016 to clarify some of the commercial uses that would be permissible on the property. In 2017, November, this board approved a subdivision and site plan approval, subdividing one lot into 4 separate lots, and granting preliminary and final site plan approval for 2 of the lots. One would have a pharmacy use, and the other would have a self-storage use. So the property owner approached the council to further amend the redevelopment plan in January. It was introduced to refine some of the uses on the remaining lots, really just wordsmithing to attract additional users for the commercial use, which Mr. Mizell will describe to you in further detail. So the ordinance was introduced. This step is for this board to determine whether the amendment is consistent with the current master plan that's in place in the township, and the outcome of tonight, if the board is in agreement with Mr. Mizell's findings, that there be a resolution adopted determining that, based on the testimony of the township's planner, that the amendment is consistent with the township's current master plan.
Council, do you want to go through the amendments very briefly before our expert testifies?
Sure. There's contemplated a use on one of the lots for a convenience store with fuel sales. And to attract that use and those users, frankly, they require specific language, which Mr. Mizell will mention to you, and how it differs from the original, or the existing, I should say, redevelopment plan. The second is some signage changes, some really in more proportion than anything else, kind of bulk requirements for signage. And the last one is the standards, in the redevelopment law, similar to a zoning variance, a C variance, as the board's familiar with. There are allowed deviations from the master plan if there are minor bulk deviations. This amendment clarifies basically that the standard is identical to that which would be for a C variance. So those are the 3. They're relatively minor. They relate to the property that's not been approved yet in the redevelopment area, not been approved for site plan. And if this board finds that the amendment is consistent, it would send its resolution back to the governing body saying we found it's consistent, and the governing body would adopt the ordinance and the amendment, and then the developer could go forward with site plan approval on that lot for this board.
Mr. Mizell, you're still in the road.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dean. The reference to the definition. Initially, there was a definition called gasoline service stations with convenience centers. That was what was in the plan when it was submitted back in 2013 and the modifications in 2016. What's proposed is a definition called retail convenience store with fuel sales. Slightly different than what was originally put in the document. I just wanted to go back briefly, and I can understand the board's concern when you're handed the documents that's that thick at the last minute and you have to go through it. But the changes that were made are very small compared to the scheme of things. What you got was an entire history of the redevelopment plan in that 50-page document. You got the first document, you got the ordinances, you got the resolutions. So I'll try and keep this as concise as I can. Dean has actually really covered almost all of it. So we have that definition that meets what is set to go in that location, which we all refer to as a Wawa. A Wawa is going to be brought for you, a site plan for a Wawa is going to be brought to you. And this definition of a retail convenience store with fuel sales helps put the focus on the retail convenience rather than the gasoline or any other way that the definition could have been misconstrued. Signage, what can happen is sometimes plans don't meet the proposed use, and developers will come in and ask for variances for plans. And as Dean mentioned, we have now added language that allows for de minimis or very minimal deviations from these documents. But when you're talking about signage, exceeding the signs of signage, giving variances for that is not really a good planning practice. And in the past, developers have asked for variances. What is the preferred method is to amend the plan to be more accommodating to the sign ordinance or the signs that are proposed, and in this case, that is what happened. The signs that are being considered, we're going to need variances based on the reports that we got from the developers. So rather than ask for a variance, we're asking for you to amend to make the accommodation for the signage that we anticipate being brought in. And illustrations of that have been added to this document. If you go to the back of the plan, you'll see the exhibits that were provided for you, so you get a very good understanding of what signs are going to be proposed with an amendment to this plan. Dean mentioned language that was added that allows you to grant variances rather than to redo the plan or to go against the plan overall. And since we talked about how this affects the master plan, again, there's a section in the report that talks about the goals. What this amendment will allow to happen is to continue to encourage a balance of land uses, diversification in commercial areas, provide rehabilitation or reconstruction or non-residential development that will promote new jobs, encourage revitalization of business areas. This is indeed a redevelopment zone. Enhance the community appearance. Those are all goals stated in the plan, and generally that's what these amendments will allow to happen.
Are you recommending that these changes be passed by the board?
Yes, that's proposed.
Do you consider these changes to be sound planning?
Yes, sir, I do.
Council, anything else?
Just would close it, again, the review of this board is to determine, based on Mr. Meisel's recommendations, whether the proposed amendment to the redevelopment plan is consistent with the town's current master plan. We prepared a resolution together with Mr. DiBiase, and that's for the board's consideration tonight. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I just see that the applicant counsel is here. I don't know if you'd like to address us.
Mr. Chair, I think that your counsel has adequately represented what we're seeking to do this evening. I think that if you look at the proposals, the changes that are being requested in the redevelopment plan, they're really de minimis, they're rather minor in nature, and rather than request variances for signage, we're asking that the redevelopment plan be amended, which I think is a better course.
For the record, just...
oh, I'm sorry. Michael Oliveira, O-L-I-V-E-I-R-A, with the offices of Chiesa, Shahinian, and Giantomasi. I'll give you a card because that's what we want.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any comments? Mr. Walsh?
Of course. You said the figures in the back were being added.
The illustrations, yes.
The illustrations.
Pictures of the signs.
Also, on page 7, you said structures shall have the architectural characteristics and qualities similar to those illustrated in figure 1. Where did you get figure 1?
Figure 1 should be Exhibit A.
Right, but where does that come from?
Where does this come from? It's clearly a rendering of a convenience store as an artist receives.
I realize that.
Yeah. So
okay. Now, how does those characteristics?
What's difficult to do in a situation, which is why the picture was included, to try and describe this as a layperson to the board is difficult. If you show them a picture of what it's going to look like, it makes it easier to address. So that's why the exhibit was included.
Okay, well, in phase 1, we already approved self-storage. For this property, so how does...
Self-storage for this property?
So there, I'm sorry, just to clarify, There was one lot originally. It was subdivided in 2017. There was subdivision approval and site plan approval granted to create 4 separate lots. And on 2 of those lots, one lot has been approved for pharmacy use, and the other lot has been used for self-storage. So there's still remaining 2 lots within the overall redevelopment area to be further redeveloped. And I just wanted to remind you, because it's a great question, this is a guide, or really it's like the ordinance, which will govern the application if adopted. The site plan approval ultimately has to come back to this board, as you know, to approve the kind of details and the appearances, so the board will have the ability to comment on that at a future time, for the details.
No, well, my question was, this was an amendment to the entire project. You already approved the self-storage as you stipulated. And I don't see how the characteristics of self-storage are similar to those in the figure 1, which you specified.
The permissibility of the self-storage has not changed.
Not the permissibility, the architectural characteristics.
So the concern, is the question that someone might build a self-storage facility that looks like that exhibit? Is that the concern?
No, we already approved something which does not, from my recollection, meet the architectural characteristics of what you showed in figure 1.
Correct.
And you said structures should do that.
Right, I understand now. But that is not a retail, the self-storage, the exhibits that are referenced relate only to the retail, to the convenience, the convenience stores and their fuel sales. It doesn't relate to the warehouses. It specifically ties those exhibits in to that. I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
No, it's under section 9, building design. There's some stipulation on it's only retail.
It says retail convenience stores with fuel sales shall have architectural characteristics and qualities similar to those exhibit A.
It says structures shall have.
Structures is struck. Structures is no longer included.
Page is that?
Page 7.
I'm on page 10. Okay,
The bottom of page 7. 9H.
I see. Under building design. See what he's talking about, the difference? This is the first building design here. If we go back. It's a matter of the intent is for that graphic to illustrate a convenience store with retail sales. That's what
we can clarify Steve's point. We can clarify that. We can clarify that paragraph H to state that the retail stores with fuel sales shall have. I see what you mean. It's a general terms structures. That's the problem.
Yes.
We can fix that.
Thank you for bringing that up. Because on page 10, it
You're
does
gonna
address
strike it,
that.
council?
Yeah, we'll replace structures, the word structures in paragraph 9H with
Retail convenience store with fuel sales.
retail convenience stores with fuel sales.
That was easy enough.
Yeah.
I have one question. I feel like we're getting ahead of ourselves a little. I don't think the board has a problem with approving the convenience store with gasoline sales because it was part of the original conversation. But why can't we just give them these small variances when they present a site plan? Why do we have to do it? Because there's really not a lot of understanding about what we're improving.
You
So,
can.
I mean, I feel a little uncomfortable saying, well, we're going to change the zoning before we really even see the product. So I don't think the use is a problem. It was previously stated that that was an intended use, but I have a little problem saying, okay, yeah, increase the signs, they were gonna be locked into that, and we might not like what we get, we're gonna have no recourse.
It's a very good point you're raising. And it's a long road to attract a user. And some of them, you know, and that's not happened here, but for example, you have to have legislation in place which will attract the user. So I don't disagree with you. We try. The nice thing about the redevelopment area is you can be specific, so you can comment on it now versus a zoning ordinance is a little bit more general. So the intent here is to try to make it specific as to the extent that the board is happy and comfortable going forward. If you're not comfortable, we would hope you'd understand the logic, the reasoning behind it is that we need to make sure that it's an attractive redevelopment plan that would bring these users.
And those changes in the signs would make that much of an impact on the development, or on the developer? I mean, they often come asking for bigger variances than 20 square feet on the sign.
Well, if it's a variance, well, that's, you can ask Mr. Mizell that question. But the signage, in terms of whether the difference, the details and the difference of what was there and what was proposed, but each user has their certain signage, configurations. You know, when you see it, it's not here, but for example, at Domino's, they have certain signage formats, which we're trying to be flexible, but at the same time have a prescribed redevelopment plan which addresses those requirements.
If you look at page 13, you'll see that the changes we're talking about in most of these cases is fairly small. Instead of lettering of 48 inches, which was currently, they're at 52 is proposed as a 4-inch difference. Height not to exceed 8 feet instead of 6. On a well-traveled road, that's understandable. Instead of one frontage sign per, they ask for 2. And again, you've got multiple uses in a convenience store site. You go to page 12, instead of one sign per street frontage, 2, 70 square feet, the sign area is very reasonable. And again, maximum vertical dimension of a wall sign shall not exceed 6 feet as opposed to 3. So rather than grant 6 variances and go against the plan that you have, in my opinion, it's better to change the plan and know what you're playing with.
Would this lock us into other developers? If we created this, would it lock us into other developers at that site if they also wanted increased signage?
Specific to this redevelopment site.
To this site, I'm saying another development on that site, because there are other parcels.
This would govern, correct, this would be the zoning essentially for that property.
We're recreating the zoning for a future.
But you have, if you can remember, there are two of the sites have already been approved, and we're not coming back with those 2 sites.
Would this site go from the pharmacy to the end of the property? Would that be the only 2 on the frontage there? The proposed gas station and the pharmacy?
Not quite to the end.
So you'd have one more site.
There is one more site in the rear.
Two vacant, two unapproved, I should say.
Remember, the other parcels still have 11 acres. We still have a very large tract of land.
And what we're trying to do by amending the redevelopment plan in this fashion is to satisfy a statewide chain of stores that have specific requirements as to their signage, just as banks do and other facilities do. And as Mr. Mizell said, these are relatively minor requests for changes.
And the board would not be losing jurisdiction for variance. If an applicant wanted to go to 9 feet,
absolutely,
they've got to come here. So the cap is 8.
And it would, true, it would have to come here in any event, just for site plan approval, and where they would catch us something, in excess of what is permitted.
But to echo what Mr. DiBiase is saying, if we wanted to, with someone else, come in and have a 9-foot sign as opposed to 8 feet, that would now require a variance.
In response to Mr. Conti's concern, I certainly began to question it as well, only because when we keep on referring to Figure 1, Figure 1 is not a simple drawing. It looks like a photographic reproduction of an existing facility, and the area that you're pointing to on page 18 at the top designates a significantly large area above the entrance to to an example of a rendering of the architectural characteristic, there's a significant space that's designated there. And so the question becomes, we need to also be sensitive to the fact that this is going to be in the area where we have the hospital, we have other medical offices, and I was concerned about how glaring and obvious this signage would be, considering that it's across from Richmond Park, nice area, and where the medical offices and the hospital center is, which we certainly want to expand that whole identity with our medical center. And it really appears here that it's quite large. And I think that's what we were asking. And it was prompted by Mr. Walsh's referring to figure 1. We were looking at figure 1, and then we noticed that this is where the signage would be, and that's what raised our concerns.
My only other concern with the signage is what we have might be all well and good for the properties, which border on Franklin. But as you move back and get closer and closer to the residential properties in the rear, I don't know if we want that big of a sign and the glare going into people's backyards.
I just want to remind, and these are all great comments, the role here is for this board at this point. It's not a site plan application. It's the role is, and I don't mean to cut the conversation short because it's a good one, but at the end of the day, the determination is whether this amendment to the redevelopment plan is consistent with the master plan. That's the step.
That is the step.
That's the step we're at now.
And when the site plan application comes in front of us, we will be concerned about screening and lighting and glare and location.
And I don't mean to cut the conversation short because it's a good one, but at the end of the day, we have to take these collective comments and say, okay, is it consistent with our master plan? And the board does need to be comfortable that when it comes back to you, if it goes back to the council and is adopted, and it comes back to you, or application comes back to you, within the confines of this redevelopment plan / zoning, are you going to be comfortable with that? And at this point, is this amendment consistent with the master plan? That's the question. That's the question.
Well said.
Ms. Shore, I mean, if you look at that picture in Exhibit A, it certainly looks like a sign is going to go there. Let's just call it that is certainly looks like it. I can't imagine that a big sign is going to go there. Again, well, just to make it as easy as I can, we're defining a new definition of a retail convenience store with gas stations. We're expanding the size slightly to accommodate the national chain. And we're giving you now flexibility to grant variances in the future rather than to amend a plan or ask for variances that are not reasonable. That's in a nutshell what this process is.
Anyone else? Mr. Walsh?
Just a quick question for myself.
Yes.
If we approve these sign increases, and a site plan comes to us for the area near the residential. Okay, if they have signs in accordance with these increased signage, okay, how can we tell them that they need to make them smaller if they're already...
This actually can only go on 2 locations. It's got the 11-acre parcel and the new subdivided parcel that's been created. So that's the only 2 places where this rendering would have any, or these rules have any application. But to answer your question,
The answer is you negotiate.
well, yeah, again, these are just ground rules for a site plan to be submitted.
And I would add, this board always has the ability, one, if there is any relief, if there is any deviation modifications as requested, as Mr. DiBiase is suggesting, as a negotiation. But this board always has the ability to impose reasonable conditions, even on an as-of-right application, as you all know and you've been through. So I think that's where you protect yourself, Mr. Walsh, against those kind of concerns. If you're concerned about the lighting that was mentioned earlier, or the nature of the signage, it would be a comment brought up by your board planner and vetted at the application.
I just don't want this board to be put into a box where we have no control over it.
No.
And that is, in a way, it is the nature of redevelopment, and saying it,
Well, I have to say, I've gone to more rural areas where national chains seem to accommodate the surrounding area a little bit. We granted a sign increase across the street, it was on Washington Avenue for the pharmacy. I don't think we're unreasonable. Again, we're adjacent from the park, there are some conditions there that are a little different than a typical commercial zone, which it never was. So I think a lot of people already feel a little uneasy with the way the area is changing. So then we start to question, well, why are we going to make these signs even bigger than maybe they need to be? Who are we actually advertising to if the park is across the street? Obviously, the size of the signs that exist in the present zoning seem to be big enough for everybody else. If we were to make them even bigger now, well, we're not on a highway. Across the street is a park. We have, 4-lane road. I don't think anybody's going to miss that a Wawa gas station is there. So to some degree,
I would venture to say to you, in response, that because it's not on the highway is one of the reasons that you need to expand the signage.
I have to disagree.
You need to draw a tract to areas that are not as
Yeah, but anybody that drives by that street
populated.
is certainly going to be able to see the signage which is already permitted. Again, I feel a little uncomfortable granting bigger signs, being locked into that before we've seen the site plan.
One of your options is you can approve the definition, you can approve the ability to grant variances. And what you would get is you'd get the same request.
Maybe in the end, I would say, yeah, okay, that seems reasonable, give them the bigger sign. But tonight, we don't really have that in front of us. We have some rendering of a building that we really don't know what the actual facade of the building is going to look like. And so we're being asked to approve something before we see it.
Well, you're asked, what you're being asked to do is to approve that it's in conformance with your master plan.
But it actually isn't, because it's not in
Well,
conformance with the present zoning, correct?
No, what our planner is telling us, and you're bringing up very good points, and it's a good time to bring them out, is what your planner is advising you is that the proposed signage increases are, and I'll let him describe it, I don't want to use Joe's thunder, but that it's consistent with their master plan, and it makes that determination based on the location of the property, its familiarity with the master plan, and that's where the guidance comes from, and you don't necessarily have to agree with it, but that's his testimony has been that the sign increases based on the existing, compared to the existing redevelopment plan, because you already have a redevelopment plan, is relatively de minimis, and those increases would not be contrary to what you have in your existing master plan. All your points are completely valid, and if you have to weigh that, whether you feel that if you agree with the consistency determination, if you feel too constrained to do your job as the planning board. But I would recommend that you follow the recommendation of the board planner in this case. And particularly, we don't know what the reaction or the impact of limiting the signs would be in frankly the ability to draw users to this property. We don't know what the impact might be.
Well, I have to say, with such minor signage increases, I would be surprised to know that a national chain wouldn't want to come in because they have 10 less square footage of sign on Franklin Avenue.
Conversely, you may be exactly opposite. They may say that we need to have that signage in order to come forward.
We have the land, and if they want to put a gas station there, maybe we don't always have to give them exactly what they want. I have seen rural settings where signage definitely conforms to the surrounding area. Not every McDonald's has a 40-foot sign with a big arch. Some of them are a little smaller. That happens to be right across from, like, really a national monument, which is cherry blossom land, right? Okay, it's been there for how many years? I don't know why they want to increase the signage there. We've had that come before the board, and we've always passed it. But again, I'm trying to understand why we have to do it before the site plan. We may very well do it. I feel uncomfortable doing it before I see it.
This is designed to help you make a decision.
And
Here are
of
the
course,
guidelines which you're saying you have to abide by these when you submit your site plan. If you don't like some of the criteria, you certainly are within your rights to say we don't like those criteria. But I don't want to see you say the definition is not necessary or incorrect, because it's necessary for clarifying what's going to go at that location. And again, to give you the flexibility to grant variances rather than to go through the process that we're going through right now. I mean, that's the whole idea.
Well, I think that I'm familiar with at least one model of Wawa, which those of us who live in the area know that it's in Bergen County on the other side of the river near Ackerman Ave. And it would take a person with really limited potential not to recognize that it was a significant gas station. Can't miss it. And I'm not saying that it isn't. It's a really lovely, but I feel the same way that Mr. Conti does. If you don't pull, if the Wawa people do not pull the type of business that they hope to, that discussion can't come up with us again as to modification of the sign. But right now, as a board member, as with you, I'm willing to do the work later on you're coming to us with the variances. Then, as Mr. Wolf said, box us in. I'm not comfortable with this, with just the aspect of the signage right now.
Again, the language that's been added will allow you to do that.
Would it be worth the exercise to go through each, call it increase or change in the size to see where maybe the issue
I was
is?
just curious as to why they want to increase the size. That's my own opinion.
I'm not giving testimony, but I think you heard from the developer that there are, I know because on the private side I represent Domino's. I know that Domino's has only a certain sign. That's just the way they did. It's a national brand, and you got to have this size, this proportion. The D is this big, and the Domino is this size. So that's not a great answer, but I think that's the reality that we live in today.
It's sad to say.
And last thing I want to do, because I do a lot of board work, is take away from this board its role to do, what it knows best. It knows the area. Obviously, we all know the area very well. But there's a little bit of a push and pull between. We want to bring in, good users, but we also want to be able to dictate what we want in our town. So
I'm sorry. I'd like to propose at this time that we have some legal counsel, and we'll take a 5-minute recess.
Great.
Patty, can I ask one more question? Mr. Michelle?
Yes.
Where in the amendment does it specify that the signage changes are limited only to you said the 11 and the 12 acre parcel?
I said there were only 2 parcels left, and this is clearly intended for the 2 acre plus or minus parcel that was originally in the site plan that you were going to look at. They had to withdraw that particular piece because they didn't have a tenant, or they didn't have a contract. They clearly have a contract now with the convenience store, with the Wawa, to move forward with this.
So the remaining lots include the
There's 2 lots remaining, the 11 acre lot and the 2 acre lot that was subdivided as a result of your action back in November.
Right, so that includes the lot right next to the residential.
Okay, we're going to recess.
You're actually saying whether or not that would impact an hour or 2 or so. Council, you have Any comments?
So
you'd like
yes,
to
and
make?
after hearing the thoughtful comments of the board and hearing the results of the discussions, we make the recommendation that the signage modifications in the amendment to the redevelopment plan be withdrawn. So what you have is the change in the language regarding use. That is from a convenience center, gasoline station and convenience center to convenience store with fuel sales. And then you have in there the deviation standard language where deviations can be granted, and leave it to the applicant to, when they come back here, seek variances for those things. And we'll also pick up that one clarification from Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, Mr. Walsh's clarification.
Are there any other comments? No. All right, I'll open up to the public now. And public have any questions? Sorry, Mr. Frantantoni?
I just got one comment if I can put on, I'm sorry.
Well, you're still under oath, which is fine.
Yeah, I'm glad to see this parcel developed as it is without residential. However, you approved 2 parcels already, the drugstore and the storage facility. I recommended, and I believe the board made it a condition, to widen Mill Street on the south side by 10 feet to allow for a right turn lane when you're heading east. At the time, you made it a condition, but not with those 2 units. And you said the next development, that's when we're requiring them to do it. So I hope you do it, and now would be a good time for them to do it with the other work going on Mill Street. You take that sharp curve out of there, and they got 10+ acres. 10 feet is not a big thing to give up to the township to create a right turn lane. So if you're going to amend it, I hope you amend it that now with this 3rd use, they have to make that widening happen.
Absolutely, I think that was the desire of the board.
Right. And council, you're working with the county on that, I believe.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's our
Any other
intention.
comments? No? All right, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we'll have a motion.
I think it's appropriate to make a motion with the change that council voluntarily made. Thank you for that. And then you and I will clean up this language for next month. Okay.
Make a motion to move to the
Second.
Okay. Roll call, Lois?
Mrs. Inalderado.
Yes.
Mr. Conti.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw.
Yes.
Mr. Corvo.
Yes.
Mr. Vogt. Ms. Rico.
Yes.
Mr. Seeley.
Yes.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Michael, good to see you.
Good to see you, Mr. DiBiase, as always.
Right?
Thank you.
Well done. To move this along, you want to pre-mark everything? You want to pre-mark everything?
There's nothing. One item, that's it.
So what?
That's a good scared
It only
me.
has to do with the
Every-
rescission,
everything.
2 conditions, not. It's a quick act. You won't be here long.
Don't say that, we jinx
It is first.
Meeting is back in order. Under new business, we have PB 2017-07. Previously granted site plan approval for retail convenience store use and imposed certain conditions. PB 2017-07A, present applicant seeks to rescind and/or modify 2 of the conditions imposed with the prior approval.
Mr. Chairman, just for bookkeeping, how many members voted on this application originally? Is there anyone who did not vote on this application? 2. Did 3? Yes. Did the 3 of you read the transcript?
Yes, I did.
Would you individually certify that to our court reporter one at a time, Mr. Conti?
Yes, I have read the transcripts in reference to this development.
Yes, I have read the transcripts in regard to this.
And that's Arlene Shaw.
Yes, I've read the transcripts.
Good.
We got 9 people.
All right.
Proceedings, Chair? Mr. Chairman, members of the board, council's name is Robert Cassione, the firm is Cassione Pomaco, 524 Union Avenue in Belleville. I represent Belleville J&S Holding LLC. The Belleville Planning Board, you people, previously granted site plan approval and associated bulk variances to permit a 7-Eleven convenience store at the property in question, 212-216 Belleville Avenue. At the time of the approval, the board imposed certain conditions. This is an application to rescind and/or modify 2 of, I believe, the 9 conditions. We are seeking to eliminate condition number 4, which requires an individual to access driveway during the time school children are present. We are seeking to modify condition number 9 so that the Belleville Avenue driveway will be ingress and right turn egress movements. My witness from Burton Engineering is Dawson Bloom, and he will review the municipal traffic impact, other similar circumstances in Belleville, and the approved safety if right turns are allowed out of the Belleville Avenue driveway. He will also discuss the procedure to justify eliminating the requirement that an individual be present at the driveway access during the time school children are present. I'd like to call my first witness, Dawson Bloom.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
My name is Dawson Bloom, last name B-L-O-O-M. I represent Burton Engineering, 66 Glen Avenue, Glen Rock, New Jersey.
What is your occupation?
Civil engineer.
How long practicing in the field of engineering?
25 years.
Review your degree or degrees.
I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from NJIT, a Master of Science in Transportation Engineering also from NJIT.
And are you a licensed engineer in the state of New Jersey?
I am, and it's in good standing.
Just briefly give the board the benefit of some of your experience.
Certainly.
We'll accept your witness as an expert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mark this,
Please. Now, I guess we would be A1 at this time,
I
Mr.
would start
DiBiase.
A1 with today's date.
Yeah.
Okay. A1, this is a landscape rendering dated today's date. Again, is
Would you review the Belleville Avenue driveway?
certainly. Belleville Avenue driveway is located at the eastern end of the property along Belleville Avenue. It is relatively close to the stop bar. Again, as you know, most of you know, Belleville Avenue, Union Avenue is geometrically a somewhat disconnected intersection, so it's not perfectly square. And the board, in its previous decision, chose to restrict any egress movements out of this driveway. There was, in reviewing the transcripts, as I did not testify in the previous hearing, there was a great deal of consideration given to safety and the safety of those movements coming out of the driveway onto Belleville Avenue. And we recognize that. However, in assessing the site and from the 7-Eleven's perspective, again, as a convenience store, primarily being convenience as its operation. In other words, 7-Eleven is not necessarily a destination location. You're not going to specifically pick out this 7-Eleven to go to unless it's convenient for you to go there. Either you're going to work, or it's on your travel route, or you happen to be going by and you need something. The ITE manual, the traffic engineering manual, it does recognize this when assigning trips as well. Typically for convenience stores, they will assign a 60% rating to pass-by traffic. In other words, it's that traffic that's generally passing the store that will use that location. And in assessing the business impact of restricting all movements out of the Belleville Avenue driveway, 7-Eleven has really made the assessment that a full restriction in that is really going to impact their business significantly. So again, and to preface, as Mr. Gassion mentioned, we're not seeking full egress movement out of the driveway. We're simply requesting the right turns. We understand and we concur that making left turns out of this driveway into the eastbound lane of Belleville Avenue is not only extremely difficult, but potentially dangerous as well. So we are requesting that the right turns are permitted. And really that is the basis of that is for two reasons. One is when we analyzed and went back and analyzed the level of service of the intersection once those restrictions were put on this driveway. In other words, when we went back and reanalyzed the level of service, which under the original proposal and under current conditions is a level of service C for the intersection. When you take all of this egress traffic and push it, all of the exiting traffic for the site to Union Avenue, you actually have a degradation of the level of service of the intersection at Union Avenue and Belleville. So it goes from a C to a D. So that means there's an additional amount of delay at that intersection, or certain legs of that intersection. Whereas if, and again, we also looked at if right turns are only permitted at this at the Belleville Avenue intersection, and then the remainder of the traffic is required to exit the Union Avenue driveway, then the impact doesn't exist. So it remains a C. So really, by pushing all of the exiting traffic to the Union Avenue intersection, you unintentionally have now created a roadway issue that didn't exist previously. It may be slight, but it's still creating an issue that didn't exist previously and wouldn't exist if right turns are permitted onto Belleville Avenue from that exit. Secondly, it is really a safety issue. And again, I understand there was a great amount of consideration given to the safety issue for turning out onto Belleville Avenue. We all understand that it's a high-volume roadway, and it would rely somewhat on individuals that are queued at this light at the time, allowing folks to get out into traffic. This is not an uncommon occurrence at any corner location. Franklin Drolleman, a lot of those areas have the same type of situations. While I'm not going to be able to specifically discuss traffic volumes at those locations, I think we've all driven them enough to know that they're fairly somewhat similar traffic conditions. Close enough where you can comparatively make an assessment that at that intersection, and we all know the gas station, the Dunkin' Donuts, and it's a high volume area, those things do happen there. People allow you out into traffic. Those things can occur. And the other bigger issue is, while this does rely on the availability of openings or gaps here and drivers in the queue to allow folks in, you're actually getting into one line of traffic. There's really no sight distance issues. You're not moving when you're doing it. You're stationary. Whereas at this location, because you have to now And the majority of the traffic that would be exiting on Belleville Avenue, whether you're going east or west, if it was both left and right turns permitted, you would either be going westbound on Belleville Avenue or eastbound on Belleville Avenue. That would be the general breakdown of the split of the traffic. So now, when you take all of that traffic and then it's averaging 50 to 60 trips, now you're pushing to this intersection in addition to what was already there. From a safety perspective, and again, safety only, you're now asking drivers that want to go west on Belleville Avenue, which is about 50% of the, roughly 50% of the trips that would be exiting the Belleville Avenue driveway, to now cross a live northbound lane of Union Avenue and also rely on 2 lanes of traffic to provide a gap. Because generally, while it's not striped, this is typically 2 lanes here when it queues up. Those individuals that are making a right turn typically are on the near side lane to the curb. Those that are either going straight or left would typically be on the left lane. So you're now asking a car, or the multitude of cars, whether they have to go left or right, particularly the westbound traffic, to not only need a opening in this lane, but need an opening in that lane while also crossing the live lane of Union Avenue. So generally from a safety, just from a safety standpoint, I would argue that allowing just right turns out here is safer. Because what will ultimately happen is, over time, this will balance itself out. As people and regular users of this site and such understand how the traffic patterns work, they will then have the option of choosing and making a choice. Whereas if you completely restrict all of the egress traffic, they have no choice. Everything goes out here. So now, you're again, from a safety perspective, you're going to have instances where folks are getting a little antsy and they drop out into the lane. Well, you have a live through lane when the light is green, hoping to force folks to allow them in, which is really unsafe. Whereas all of the weight here is located on the site, where it's not getting into the traffic. And again, as I mentioned, these are very common issues that we look at for corner properties, whether they're gas stations, convenience stores, combinations, and there's many of them throughout town that are like this. Those are just really examples. That's not to say the board's approved these or done these in the past. I'm just saying that, in general, this is a situation you face regularly at a corner location. And I would argue that to keep the traffic on site as much as possible, and again, we're not requesting the left, we're just requesting the right, to help somewhat balance this traffic out, to not allow degradation of the roadway traffic at the same time as a
Microphone's on. Just trying to figure out where the noise is coming from.
As a, again, as the best agreeable alternative to have the least amount of impact on the roadway, obviously, because there's been discussion throughout tonight, as we heard, about density of traffic, amount of traffic, and all of that. So in this case, simply by allowing the right turns to be permitted, not all turns, not all movements out of the Belleville Avenue exit, we can do our best to ensure that there isn't an impact to the municipal roadway, that it does remain a bit safer, and that now a portion of the drivers leaving the site have a choice and gives them more options.
Lou, you mentioned 50 traffic movements. Please explain to the board what you meant by 50 traffic movements and whether that's prime time or where you are.
They would be during the peak. So when I mentioned that, that was based on our original traffic report. So the numbers didn't change. We just assigned them to different locations. So those trips, whether they're the AM, we looked at 3 different time periods, AM peak, PM peak, and Saturday. On average, I think there were about 50 to 55 if you average the 3 time periods out of those trips over that period, a peak period, would be going to that driveway. And so we really just reassigned, we didn't generate any new traffic. So using the same numbers that were in the previous, the traffic report, we just reassigned those from this location to that location. And that's what resulted in the drop in the level of service of the intersection.
Mr. Bloom, would you review your conclusions with regard to this particular condition?
Certainly. You know, again, pushing all the traffic to the Union Avenue driveway certainly lowers the level of service of the roadway at the intersection, at the Belleville Avenue, Union Avenue intersection. And conversely, by allowing the right turns out and prohibiting lefts and the remaining traffic out the Union Avenue driveway, the level of service remains the same. So level of service of C, which was the existing condition, also would be the proposed condition based on the assessment. And again, I would argue that the movements out into Belleville Avenue's traffic are a safer movement than crossing a live northbound lane, and potentially to go west would be needing to get 2 gaps onto Union Avenue to make that westbound move. And again, I think the board recognizes that as a convenience store, we want to make it both convenient and safe. So we're trying to accommodate all of these things at the same time.
Would you review the crossing guard issue at, that's the condition, I believe, number 4?
Certainly. Then again, reviewing the transcripts, I know there was a lot of discussion about you know, the proximity of the 7-Eleven to school number 8 and the amount of not only pedestrian traffic, but specifically school-aged children at this location. And there are things we can do physically at the driveways, I think that would be indicators and a safety indicator that we typically do, because having a traffic person at that driveway for a specific time is uncommon. I'll say it's. I'm not sure, and I know there's many locations throughout town that are in proximity to school. School number 7 has the gas station right across the street with the candy store right next to it. There's kids walking across those driveways all the time. Even the Dunkin' Donuts in Franklin Avenue is about the same, roughly the same distance away. And in those situations, there isn't any protection. And I'm not arguing that we don't have to do something. What I'm saying, and what I've done in the past and has been highly effective, is we would treat the driveway apron and sidewalk that crosses the driveway with a darker colored concrete. So it provides a contrast to those walking by, so they know something's different. So you have a visual contrast on the ground, whereas your typical concrete is a lighter gray or a whitish color. This would be a dark gray, or what they call a French gray, a dark color. In addition, we would put either in yellow or typically in yellow or white across the pavement, just as the drivers are exiting the driveways at each location. Again, if the board so is amenable to the right turns exiting Belleville Avenue, just a sign that says slow children crossing. So to alert drivers that there is a propensity to have children crossing this location, and also adding signs facing each of the sidewalks on each side that basically say caution active driveway. So now, and what I will argue is that these improvements will be permanent. In other words, they're not there just for a specific time. They're there all day long. So any time that the store is operating, these safety measures are in place. And there are more than you would normally see at a convenience store location. again, even in any of our high traveled locations throughout town. So, and they're permanent. They can be repaired, replaced, but they're there forever. And it's not just an hour or 2 hours in the morning or the afternoon or during the school time.
No further questions?
I have a question. The car enters the lot from Belleville Avenue, parks against the building. So here, is there enough room for those cars to turn around if they want to exit that driveway now? Or are they going to try to back out?
No, they wouldn't back out. I mean, you wouldn't anticipate somebody trying to back out of here. They would come out this way and come in now.
There's sufficient room
There's
for them to
sufficient
turn around?
room to make that move.
And as far as no left turn, I mean, we have that issue at the Dunkin' Donuts on Franklin and Geraldine. When we approved that plan, there was no left turn on Franklin Avenue. One day there's a sign there, the next day they want it over, and everybody turns left out of the driveway. So if we put a sign saying no left turn, that's going to do nothing. Everybody's going to be trying to make a left turn. I mean, I don't know if you could construct a driveway in a manner that you can't make the left turn.
We could certainly look at that. I mean, there's ways to do the geometry of the driveway so that it's more difficult to do that. You know, again, given that we're already this close to the stop bar, an extra couple feet to put a small little island here which directs this direction physically, I think is possible. And it really would have no impact on getting out into traffic, really.
And another question, maybe for our deputy chief. If they did have that driveway as an exit, would it be possible to move that stop line back from the traffic light until the other side of that driveway?
What, on Union?
On Belleville Avenue.
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. We'd have to see if that developed with the uniform traffic control devices to see exactly where that would have to be in relation to the light. I'm not sure.
County road too.
It's a county road?
I was thinking about that island, but the only thing is that it had to be mountable curb because your deliveries are coming through there.
Yeah, we would certainly make it wide enough and open it up enough.
So you put like a Y there, so you go and come in, but it had to be mountable curb because the deliveries come through there, the tractor trailers.
Question about the Belleville Avenue. For some reason, I don't remember. Are people going to be able to make a left going eastbound on Belleville Avenue into that driveway? Or is it just going to be westbound traffic on Belleville Avenue making your right into it?
It's access from both sides.
Okay.
Ingress. Egress, we were prohibited, period. We're asking for the right turn.
Well, I understand. I'm just based on what he said.
The original approval had access in both directions coming in.
Why I asked that is, I can understand what he's saying. I mean, we could, listen, I'm a police officer in town a long time. We put signs up everywhere. You could put the biggest orange barricade in front of somebody, they're still going to go around it. I know like that possibility of the little island might help that, because if you have people that I know we're only supposed to make a right-hand turn, but there are going to be people trying to make that left, and if we also have someone trying to make a left into that lot going eastbound on Belleville Avenue, just don't want that to create a safety hazard. But if there was that little island or curve, whatever you would say, that might eliminate that problem, being that we're going to let people make the left off of Belleville Avenue.
There's enough room to orient the island so that it's only guiding, so it would allow full operation into the place.
That seems like an excellent idea, and my client obviously is in favor of doing that. So
yeah, I think that would eliminate that possibility of someone making a left off of Belleville, and like you said, that one person avoiding the signs and trying to make a left at the same time.
And certainly we'll work with Mr. Harris until he's comfortable with the geometry of that.
I have a concern in regard to our deputy chief's question, going east on Belleville Ave. That part of Belleville Ave narrows. So you don't have a second lane loop around option. So if somebody's making a left into that driveway coming east down Belleville Ave, you're going to have the stack up. You're going to have the stack up because of the busyness of that intersection.
Oh, I don't disagree with you. I mean, in reality, if we all have courtesy as drivers, if there's a driveway, you shouldn't block the driveway, which would allow those, but again, we're all supposed to be courteous drivers.
My question is because that left is so near that busy intersection. Whether people are making a right or people are coming straight down.
I mean, obviously that can
it's
happen. I
gonna
mean,
back
if
up.
someone's waiting, that traffic could back up into the intersection like a turn.
I-
Yes.
That
and
could
I
very well
understand-
happen.
I understand your
Yeah.
concern, Arlene, and what I would argue a little bit is that, as I think was stated here, even if those were permitted, functionally, there's very little you can do to prevent somebody from actually trying to do that. You can on site, like we're doing, right? We're saying we're gonna direct folks coming out because we can protect that on site. From folks getting in, and you see it at the corner of Geronimo and Franklin, going into the deli, at the corner, I mean, these conditions exist.
I think most people would make the left on Union Avenue and that driveway.
Right, and so again, I think it's less likely that somebody would sit and have to wait to go in. And again, I think that to control that from the outside of the site is highly difficult. It's almost impossible, as you said. To control it on the site, we do have control of that. So from a more realistic standpoint, even if it were to be set in a condition, ultimately, it's not something that's necessarily enforceable from the outside the site going in.
Dawson, the reason bringing it up is because we never had a driveway there before for commercial purposes. So that's why you would never consider the issue of a stack up before, because nothing was there to make it.
No, I agree, absolutely agree with you. It's certainly something to be aware of. I just don't think it's something that's necessarily controllable.
If you had it as just an exit and you designed the curb so you could only right turn out of it, and if you didn't have access but only exiting, then you wouldn't have to worry about that step.
And again, I think though, from the convenience store operation, from the perspective of their ability to operate and be profitable, as they've assessed it, we're now just flipping the restriction. So instead of restricting no turns out, now we're just flipping it, and the impact to the business is exactly the same. And I understand what you're saying, but we've now just changed a condition that still limits, in effect, what the operator is saying will seriously impact their ability to operate this facility.
All your chains, your Wawas, your CVS, your Walgreens, they're all looking for corners. They're looking for corners for the reason that they have two driveways. Otherwise, you're just not going to get them if they can't have two driveways. It's just not going to happen. Now, we already have an approval to go in that driveway. What we're asking for is just the additional approval to make a right turn out.
And I think
to alleviate a lot of this, I do like the additional condition of marking the driveway as such, where it's designated with the signage and all. But I think it would be beneficial, maybe Mr. Hurwitz, you can answer this question. Instead of worrying about cars cutting across, because driving is going to be driving anyway, they're going to do whatever they want, but I'm thinking, why don't we mark it where it's visual that you have double line? Update the marking in the street. Wouldn't that make sense?
Double yellow line, I think, is what Patty's talking about.
Double yellow line on Union.
That doesn't apply.
Would then,
They're going to be allowed to make a
if
left.
people are going to go out that driveway, make a left and cut across,
If they wanted to do that.
right, they want them to do that, but if you put a double line, you should, it's dangerous. That's why they want the other
They have to.
driveway, am I correct?
They have to make a left out of Union. They have to be able to do that.
again,
There is a double line.
if there's a double line, again, as Mr. Garcia mentioned, the benefit of a corner property is that you're getting convenience traffic from both legs. If you limit essentially a leg, and we're agreeable to limit half of that leg, obviously, because we're going to restrict, and to make this movement is a little bit more complicated. for somebody wanting to leave. Not complicated, but a little more troublesome, I would say, for the driver leaving that really wants to get a quick in and out, cup of coffee, paper, or whatever it is they need to get. If we're now eliminating the ability to both go east and west on Belleville Avenue in any fashion, it really eliminates the value of this as a corner property, unfortunately, from a business perspective.
Yeah, I mean, when it was the Lemonites, they were able to make the left out of there.
Not that they were supposed to, but they do it.
No, they did. I'm saying, when
No, I said, I know they
Srinas,
do
they made the
it,
left out
but
of it.
they weren't supposed to technically. Because you have the double line.
Gus,
Can I say something?
that driveway on Belleville Avenue, if you're going to allow both exiting and entering, is that wide enough?
Yes, it was designed to do that. What we're going to now do is make it a little bit wider to put the island in between. And we'll look at it, I mean, we always look at this from a movement perspective of emergency vehicles, delivery, whatever the delivery vehicle is that's going to be, that 7-Eleven typically will have, and make sure that both fire trucks, emergency vehicles, and delivery vehicles can make all the necessary movements, and garbage trucks.
I know this might sound a little off, because I remember, I believe with the path on Washington Avenue, when that was first done, there was a question about people making left-hand turns and going southbound on Washington Avenue. And I know this is going to sound a little off, and I don't have the exact words in front of me, but off the top of my head, coming out of a parking lot, if it's safe, you can cross that double yellow line to make that left-hand turn. So if that was the question on you, and again, I could research it and find out for sure, but I'm pretty positive that in a situation like that, coming out of a parking lot, if it's safe, you can make that left-hand turn and cross that double solid yellow line. If you're driving south on Union Avenue, then you're not going to be across the double yellow line to drive into the northbound lanes. So I know like everybody thinks double yellow line, we can't cross it, but coming out of a parking lot, provided it's safe, you are allowed to make that. Usually driveway, there's a break in the double yellow line. A lot of times you see that. But if it's not, and I believe on Washington Avenue at the path mark, it's a solid yellow line coming out of that parking lot, and you can make a left. Again, if it's safe, you are allowed to cross those double yellow lines.
Just like Franklin Avenue, Walgreens, people make the left in and out of there.
So I don't know if that was the concern like on Union Avenue, but that is, no, that's not illegal, that is allowed.
And typically, as Superbo said, especially that case when you're close to the intersection and you don't want to break the yellow line leading up to the stop bar, is when you wouldn't do it. I mean, when you're mid-block and you want to put a break in the yellow line, it makes sense. But if you're this close to the intersection, generally you don't want to do that.
Could you give me an idea of why you reneged on the, somebody being out there?
Again, I think, again, in my opinion, I think the visual cues and signage are more than sufficient. They don't exist anywhere throughout town. They're not common ever. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years. This is the first time I've done this.
The only thing, I mean, we gave a lot of variances, a lot of things didn't fit here. We made this plan fit, and that was a condition, and you guys agreed to it.
Right.
Now you decided, no.
Well, no, again,
there was a lot of things, setback, we did away with the signage, I mean, there was a lot of things we agreed to, and you guys agreed to one, for me, that was the biggest problem. You agreed to it, and now you just want to come back and say no.
Again, personally, I think this is a better alternative. It's not something that we're saying that we don't disagree. I think in my experience, this is a better alternative, and it's there the entire time. So it's there that entire time.
Yeah, in conjunction with crossing.
And people, when people walk as pedestrians, they walk by visual cue. And when they see things that change, it's an indicator that something is different. So beyond the change in the sidewalk pavement, across the driveway, which is a cue that there is something different there, as well as the signage that's going to be in both directions, and again, that's for all the time that the driveway is active.
The driveway I understand, making it an exit with a right turn. But doing away with that crossing person, and I'll tell you the truth, I don't know about that. you're a traffic expert, I forget how many kids a day, they said in an hour walk by there? The number like staggered me, how many kids are gonna be walking past that driveway? It's a lot of children, and we're here, you know, we're worried about safety. Whether we get a development in town or not is not as important as if a kid gets hurt.
No, I agree. I mean, nobody, when we do this is why we design for safety. And again, I can only locally cite other situations where, I don't know, maybe you know, but have there ever been instances, or is there a predominance of instances where kids, because I can't imagine there aren't as many kids walking across the driveway to the candy store or up the block.
Candy store don't have that type of traffic, though. So.
Well,
and today, I mean, if you drive a car anywhere today, drivers are so distracted. They're on the phone, have a coffee in one hand and texting with the other, and nobody pays attention what they're doing. The Parkway, I'm on the Parkway every day. It's a clear, sunny day, and cars are just wrecked because nobody pays attention. And with that many kids crossing that driveway, it's just a concern.
The area is unique in that we live near there, so the School 8 tends to have more child pedestrian traffic than others, as you're familiar with that too, I don't have to tell you.
I believe you, I understand.
There just is and it happens to be the largest school in town, population-wise. I believe by about 150 compared, so it's over 500, I think we might have there right now. Because of the apartments, because of the density that we do have with our housing, we have a tremendous amount of people.
I'm certainly not arguing the volume of traffic.
It's the safety issue.
I'm certainly not arguing the volume of pedestrian traffic whatsoever. I just think that having physical improvements that are safety measures over a 1 or 2 hour individual standing there is, you know, a benefit. So that's really my argument. Again, I can't.
Mr. Bloom, how far is there from the back of the parking spot to the entrance on Union Avenue? About 20 feet?
I can measure it.
If a car backs out, he's basically in the driveway.
Can they turn the thing, because none of us can see it.
That's why we designated the last spot to the left, the employee parking.
I don't like the whole site.
It's the only way to get out of there.
Also, let me, it's the wall seat.
Just so we can do it, yeah.
I personally don't see the use of a person being there crossing the kids either.
To give everybody a...
That's it, perfect, that's perfect.
No, everybody over here can't see. Hold on.
I don't want to make Mr. Gassion nervous. I personally think the site is small and difficult, but I also feel that the business will either prosper or suffer based on how easy it is to get in and out. So if that parking lot becomes just a cluster of people coming in and out, and there's traffic, people are going to drive past it, and they'll have other issues. It's a small site. I personally don't see the need for a crossing guard, and I like the idea of the egress on the Belleville Avenue side. I like what you're proposing. I don't like the site so much, but that's all approved. And that will
It's a
either
challenging
prosper.
site. I mean, I'm
It's a
certainly
challenging
not
site.
going to, I'm certainly not going to stand here and tell you that it's not a challenging location. We're certainly trying to, and did the safest from a circulation standpoint that we could do, and then looking to, as best we could, meet all the criteria that are required.
The only thing I can see about your position that it's a challenging site, you do more construction than I do, that's for sure. But when you deal with the major chains, they're interested in the likelihood of success of their business. If they didn't think they had enough parking, more than adequate parking, they wouldn't be involved in this
And
site.
it's not a
They did
super
their own
7-Eleven.
analysis.
It's a smaller store than say some of the bigger.
That fits the circumstances.
Again, their success, sometimes I think we try to restrict things too much. They'll be either successful or unsuccessful, partially based on that site and how easy it is to get in and out.
For sure.
Profitability, it's safety.
It's
I mean,
safety.
the other driveway, I'm fine with that, but as far as doing away with the guard, I don't know.
I wasn't here for that particular vote, but I really didn't understand asking one business to have someone stand outside.
Mr. Gassion, remember the number of kids that walk by there? So the number was pretty staggering.
A lot of kids.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Maybe like 100 kids in an hour walk past there. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, when everybody's running in to get a cup of coffee, there's 100 kids walking past that driveway.
It's a tough site.
So you're gonna make a situation that was not unsafe.
Mr. Chairman, the one thing I would like to ask, obviously there's differences of opinion amongst the board members. I would ask that we bifurcate the vote, and we vote on the first, I sum up on the first condition with regard to the driveway on Belleville Avenue being allowed to make the right turn out, and then the second condition with regard to the change on the
We're not trying to be restrictive or put an economic burden on anybody, but as far as like an hour, maybe an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon, I don't think that's an undue. And we're not saying it has to be a police officer or, you know, have an employee out there.
I understand. I just, all I'm asking is...
We are going to council. I wish we
Thank you.
got to the chair.
Thank
But
you.
we still have to open this up to the public.
We've got another question. Gerard?
Mr. Bloom? Yes. Okay. Couple of things. If we allow the right-hand turn on Belleville, okay, if you have a delivery truck in the parking lot, since you're now creating cars crisscrossing, are you creating a blind spot?
I don't believe so.
I believe so.
When, again,
Well, the testimony with regard to delivery trucks was they come off hours. And that's standard. I go to a 7-Eleven to deliver, I happen to be an early riser. Delivery truck is there at 5:30 in the morning. They don't come midday when there's customers there. And that is in the record and was testified to at the original hearing. And if I have to, I can certainly put a 7-Eleven rep back up, but that's clear in the record.
Okay. You say you're going to paint the sign on the egress?
that would be our recommendation,
Okay. Is that in addition to posting the sign caution?
yes. Yes, that
children?
would be both. So we would have, on the asphalt pavement, we would mark this, and then facing the sidewalk in either direction, we would have the caution at the driveway. So it all goes together, along with the colored concrete in the apron.
Okay, because the condition was that the sign would read caution children crossing.
So we can fix that, we can do,
Okay, because I also like that
well, no,
sign at the right-hand turn.
well, we have, again, we're putting it at both locations on the ground, and we're putting the driveway, because that would be the indicator for the pedestrians that there's an active driveway. So the signage would be for the driveway, the ground mounted would be for, the ground plane would be for the driveway.
Okay, I don't particularly like that because after a couple of years, in parking lots, the paint wears out and disappears. And
Well, you could argue that the signs get torn down and they don't get replaced either. You know, it's a maintenance issue. That's a typically common thing. You know, they have to maintain their facility in either way.
Okay. Have you gotten the approval yet from the Essex County, since these are county roads?
We have a preliminary approval from the county. We met with the county before we even filed the application before Belleville. We needed to get the final Belleville approval before we could submit the final plan to the county. But we didn't file this application without having met with the, I believe he was the assistant county engineer up in Verona, my town. I was trying to think it was Verona or Paula.
And the truck delivery, it's a tractor trailer, am I correct?
Yes, what's the size?
WV50.
There's a tractor trailer, I believe the testimony was once a week. I believe that was the testimony. Yes.
Off hours? No, the test, I'm not, it says the deliveries would be 8 to 12. Generally, you know, for the tractor trailer delivery, which comes once or twice, tops per week. But I understand the question, but if it's 8 to 12, if it was later, as long as there wasn't a noise issue, it would not block that driveway, because I know that's what Mr. Walsh's
Correct,
question is.
absolutely.
What, I think that was 8 to 12 PM, if that was.
Oh, no, I'm not
Oh.
interpreting it as 8 to 12 a.m.
Oh,
No,
okay.
no, not at all. I'm sorry, I wasn't bringing that up as an issue.
Thank you.
I try to bring, yeah, you get it.
I get it. I understand.
More questions on the board?
I wasn't here again for the vote, but what are the conditions, say you want to have a crossing guard? So you're going to have a store employee, is he trained in being a crossing guard? Are you going to have him on both driveways? What hours he's going to be there, who's going to enforce it?
The time was when children were going to or leaving school or lunchtime. So it was approximately 3 hours, less than 3 hours, where some employee would have to be out, one employee would have to be out checking the driveways. Obviously, the most crucial driveway to be checked would be Union Avenue.
So during
I
the
don't
school,
think Mr. Sheldon, Belleville school kids allowed to go home at lunch? I don't think so. No. So lunch wouldn't be an issue.
So it's then just twice.
Yep.
Times have changed since I went.
you used to take your risk as a kid, yeah.
And there is a guard in Franklin, in that Walgreens.
Any other board members have any questions? Now we'll open up to the public. Mr. Sheldon?
Michael Sheldon, I have to say, I have some really serious grave.
Sheldon, we better swear you in, this is a
Does it
separate
carry from
application.
earlier, or this is new? Actually, I gave commentary in the first part of the meeting. I have to be sworn in again.
This is a separate application.
Sure.
So we'll keep it separate.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Your name and address for the record, please.
Michael Sheldon, 47 Floyd Street, here in Belleville. I just wanted to say, I have some really serious and really grave concerns about the safety of our kids at this intersection. As we all know, this is one of the busiest and perhaps one of the most dangerous intersections in all of Belleville. By having ingress and egress on both Belleville Avenue and Union Avenue, no matter how many signs you put up, and Mr. Venero, Mr. Corbo alluded to this earlier, human nature being what it is, people are going to ignore the signs. You can have 1,000 signs on that intersection. If people are in a rush to get somewhere, to hell with the signs, they're going to do what they need to do to get out of that lot. With the way this is configured, you're also going to allow people who don't want to wait for the light, people who are westbound on Belleville Avenue, to try to get through the parking lot, to cut through to get to Union Avenue. So you're really exacerbating the problem. And while I'm not speaking on behalf of the Board of Education, nevertheless, I have to look out for the welfare of the kids at school number 8. And I think that the way this is set up, we're inevitably going to be dealing with a tragedy in short order. You might want to, there was discussion earlier about putting some sort of island on the Belleville Avenue side so that cars would be forced to make that right turn. But then I wonder how that might interfere with the tractor trailer that was supposedly going to enter from the Belleville Avenue side to make deliveries. If we go, I know this is kind of a moot issue at this point, but if we go back to the previous hearing, I thought that Mr. Frantantoni's suggestion that the footprint of the building be parallel to Belleville Avenue, exactly where the Rita's Ice and the two-family.
Obviously, I object to this testimony. The case is over.
But that would have been one way to avoid all this cross-traffic, all this cutting that's inevitably going to take place. Perhaps one solution off the top is to have 7-Eleven pay to have one of our police officers stationed at this intersection. It's my understanding that this year the Belleville Police Department has been stationing its officers at some of our schools. For example, at the middle school and on Home Street during the morning, they basically turn that part of Home Street into a one-way situation so that the kids crossing the street are fully protected. I would hope that between the 7-Eleven corporate structure and our police department, that some agreement could be made to fund a police officer, one of our police officers, to be physically present at that intersection during rush hour during the morning time and also in the afternoon to safeguard the welfare of our kids. So something you might want to think about imposing as a condition to your rescinding one of these conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
I'd just like to bring up one thing again to the public, since it was in the transcript, is that during the report, the applicant suggested, the applicant, I apologize, said, we're anticipating about 85 customers in the morning to drive in. And that's during your
Peak hour.
So I think in the peak hour of the morning, that's when vigilance when it comes to the kids. It's 85 customers is a lot of cars. So that's a good thing for business. I don't mean it negatively, but I think that we have to take into account that there's so much pedestrian traffic in that area, specifically involving kids, that I think that what was originally agreed to is what is in the best interest of kids.
Is anybody else in the public? Mr. Delgertia?
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Name and address for the record.
Tulio Jerry Delgertia, 8 Grove Street, Belleville, New Jersey. Since I'm the one who brought this thing up the last time, I'm only going in and not coming out. I did it at the end, and I didn't realize that I believe what Ms. Shore said, or Ms. Nicolarato said, is true. There is a problem. Oops, a problem here. When cars come down Belleville Avenue, and if they go to make a left in here, this is going to, while the guy's going to make a left, and this is all jammed up, and they're waiting for somebody to let him in to be nice, which doesn't happen in Belleville, I can tell you that now. What happens is the traffic here backs all the way up. All the way up. It's ridiculous. Now, the only way to solve this properly is to have an island here in the middle where you can only go out this way and you can only go in this way. That's simple. Solves all the problems. The deputy chief's 100% right, because we have a police officer on the zoning board, and this came up about the double yellow line. You can make a left turn over to go into a driveway. So that's allowed. Now, I want 7-Eleven there. I like it. I like the whole idea. I'm 100% for it. But safety comes first, not profits. Safety comes first. And the safety of the kids, and the safety of the public in general, and also not having traffic all jammed up here. You could have a situation where a guy's looking to make a left, and these guys are going straight, and now he's backed everything up where people want to make a left turn here, can't even make a left turn, because it's all backed up. And for your information, I don't know if you're aware, since you're a traffic expert, this gets backed up blocks up the hill, and blocks down the hill, and also going toward Newark. The way coming here from Union Avenue is the least blocked up area. The least. But I want to say something. Today I came down when the schools were closing and the kids were out, and there was a police officer on the corner with the lights on from the police car. So maybe they didn't have a second traffic guard or whatever, and the police officer was...
As a crossing guard?
Yeah.
If we're in a situation where crossing guards are out sick or what have you, we don't have enough, then we do fill our posts with the police officer.
And that's what happened today.
But that's only when we don't have enough of our crossing.
And the police car had the lights on,
But,
so you know.
Chief, you have crossing guards at these corners.
Yes.
Oh, there's 2 here at this corner. I can tell you that,
At
there's
all
2.
corners, right?
But today there was
That
only one
intersection
maybe,
is
and that's
2.
why the cop was there.
But again, the crossing guard's responsibility
for crossing.
will be
I understand.
at that intersection. We can't have
I
our crossing
understand they're not
guards.
responsible for
And
our
again,
traffic.
a natural, I used to be in charge of traffic for many
I
years,
do
and
remember.
I was in charge of the crossing guards. And I used to always get this question, like if I'm at my corner and a kid crosses the street, say at a driveway, what do I do? The unfortunate answer is you have to worry about your intersection. If a kid chooses to cross the street in the middle of a block, it's not right, but we as the police department and crossing guards, we have to monitor that area. Because if we worry about going down the street and then someone, God forbid, get hit by a car in the intersection we should be monitoring, then obviously the police department of the town's liable for that. So that would be a concern I would have with this. I wouldn't want anybody to rely on our crossing guard that is on that corner, the south, that would be what, the northeast corner. their primary concern is that intersection. They cannot be looking down the street to see if a kid is in jeopardy with a car pulling out that driveway. We can't have that from our crossing guards. They have to maintain the crossing that they do.
And since the tractor trailer coming up would not be handicapped by having the island here, for the simple reason that any truck coming would probably come from either Washington Avenue or 21 and would come up Belleville Avenue anyway. So they would come in and they could move whichever way they want, but I would put the islands here because, as the deputy chief said, the signs don't mean nothing. They get knocked over and that's it. This perfect example is the one he's talking about on Franklin Avenue. There is no sign there. There hasn't been no sign there for a long time. If anything, this board should ask Mr. DiLorenzo to go up there and tell them either put another sign or they're going to be cited.
They put them back up and they don't last.
Well,
I've seen them there one day and the next day.
Well, then you're proving my point that a sign don't work.
Right, that's why we...
But an island will.
That's why
If
we're
the island, if it's a cement island and it's forced that you can only come in this way, going up Belleville Avenue, and leave, which is the right that they want to make, that solves the whole problem. And safety comes first. I'm sorry, especially where kids are involved. You can't beat safety. And that way you don't have to worry about anybody coming down and trying to make a left in, because they can't. It ends the problem, all the problems. So that's my testimony, and now it's up to you guys and ladies to make a decision.
Does anybody else, Mr. Frantantoni?
Are we questioning the witnesses and
Questions and
testimony
comments at this
together?
time? Yes, together.
Why don't we swear you in because you'll do both?
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Name and address, please.
Vincent Frantantoni, 129 Mount Prospect Avenue. And just so the record shows, I think this is the wrong procedure that we're doing, because other people might say something, and then later when I testify, there may be more information. So I'm restricted in my testimony because I don't have the full ability to hear what's going on. Mr. Bloom, can you point out exactly where the parking spaces are in that plan?
Sure. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces here. Another space here, a handicap. This is the safety area for the handicap. And there's 4 more spaces heading to the...
Okay. I want to refer to the ones that are on the double side.
On the southern side.
Right. Just from this distance and being a contractor, it looks like the parking spaces, well, what are they, 18 feet, 19 feet?
9 by 18 if they're standard.
Well, whatever, that's about the same distance. The parking spaces,
this distance
and from
here
the back
is
of the
what
parking
you're
space to the sidewalk, roughly
to the
about
curb,
same.
to this curb line you're talking about here?
Yeah.
Here, I'll tell you. Yes, it's 24 feet. 24 feet, which is a standard two-way aisle
Right.
for most.
So people are going to come in on Belleville Avenue
Correct.
and pull into those parking spaces. Now, I'm going in for my call, I pulled one of those. I got my coffee, I'm coming out. You want to go into there. If you back out of that parking space, those cars on the Belleville Avenue side that we were just referring to, are they going to be able to exit the Belleville Avenue driveway?
Certainly. They would either do this and out. There's a possibility of somebody at this point doing this. So there's certainly more than enough room to maneuver. That's why they provide the 24 feet.
The last 3 cars here are going to be able to
Absolutely.
back up?
That's
and
why,
make it
that's typically why 24 feet is a standard in most dual direction drive aisles.
And you also show arrows north and south.
And because
side.
these are all two-directional aisles. They're 24 feet. Your standard drive aisle in a mall or any is 24 feet for dual purposes.
So if somebody enters on the Union Avenue driveway.
Correct.
And decides they're going to work in New York and they want to go out, can they come all the way through the parking lot and exit the Belleville Avenue?
It would be more difficult for them to do that.
Right. Also, are you familiar, I think you've been in town all the time, do you know cumulatively between Jackie's Lemon Ice and Rita's, how long those businesses were at that location?
Longer than I've been alive.
Okay, thank you. And they operated, again, they served the public many people, especially summertime, business traffic, you know, and Christmas trees they sold there, and they operated with that Union Avenue driveway very successfully. So,
Again, my client has made a business assessment that for their viability at this location, I can't argue business. That was their assessment. So I'm not going to argue with you one way or the other. I know they were successful businesses as well. They were also seasonal businesses. So I'm not going to necessarily try to compare two different business models. I'm an engineer. I'm not a marketing major. But I agree with you. I mean, I understand, but I can't, my clients made the assessment that for them to be a viable operation, the dual driveways are necessary.
I think those are my questions. Now, my testimony, like I said, I think it's a bad design. The brown part of the building, I think that should have been
I object.
all the way down
Obviously,
there.
that's already been decided. That's not the issue today.
We're talking about the driveway.
You said the back where the building is.
That's right. And I'm saying you
That's
can
not the
eliminate the driveway if the building were relocated this way and you come in the other way. They would have that big parking lot, the tractor trailers wouldn't have any problem. Okay, well, just once again up to the board, I think some of you made some good comments about that driveway, but I think that driveway is going to be a major problem for us. The previous case, I testified the problems. You all know the problems with Belleville Avenue now. This is only going to exacerbate. That Belleville Avenue driveway is going to be a major, major problem.
Thank you. Anybody else in the public have any questions or comments? If not, at this time, we'll close the public portion. Mr. Gassion,
Okay,
questions?
I got a lot of nerve. Can I have 2 minutes to talk to my client for you, someone?
Yes.
2 minutes. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I just had a brief discussion with my client. And my client is aware of the board's concern about the children in the area. His request is, could the condition be changed that he could pay for one crossing guard employed by the town to be at this location at the time when school children are coming to school and leaving school.
Third crossing guard?
That would be another cross. I mean, we're going to pay for one on our property. So the town already has 2 crossing guards. We'll pay for one on our property.
Yeah, I think it's better. It's trained, it's a trained and certified.
And we know, the town knows the person is there. The town knows the person's tied to the chief's department.
I'm not sure what the procedure would be for that, but that
We'll
would
pay
also,
for
I mean, that would probably have to go at least either the council, town manager. You're talking adding to another person to the police department. I mean,
But they're paying for it.
I know, but I'm sure, like, I don't know if the planning board can decide if
Well,
the
the
police
planning board
department's going to
certainly
hire another crossing guard. then.
Chief, the planning board certainly could recommend it.
Yeah, right. Oh, no, I mean, obviously.
And obviously, what you could do is leave it in place, subject to that recommendation. I think the recommendation is a heck of a lot better than what we had before. You got a professional doing it.
Right.
So we would, if that's acceptable to board to make that recommendation, if that is acceptable, we would withdraw that particular point. Obviously, we're not withdrawing the first point, crucial to our process. Mr. Bo, the only point I would make is, there's no question the town incurs some liability, but we're the only place in town that would have it. We're volunteering to do it. You're not talking about, there's 30 other places in town.
An option, like a private security, where the owner is responsible for it?
That's not our proposal. We think the best proposal is for an experienced town crossing guard. And again, what my suggestion as to what the board could do if they were to see it, they would make that as a recommendation, subject to subject to government approval. If not, it would fall back to the existing conditions.
I think that's good neighborhood. Well, you're volunteering.
I'm volunteering. We're withdrawing as long as the board supports it. I think for us to go to the governing body, it would be good
if the planning board would recommend that because of your concern about, and again, I would ask that the resolution say, if the council does not recommend it, we return to what was previously approved.
Yeah, why don't we take a vote on that and get that out of the
And then,
way?
if we could.
Okay. Somebody want to make a motion, Mr. Chairman?
Make a motion to move the amendment to the crossing guard at the driveways.
The town crossing guard as the safety officer.
Compensated by,
Right, that the board
Yeah.
recommend, that the board
And if we can't get that done, then we go back to the original condition.
Someone want to second it?
Second.
Lois, call the roll. You good with that, Michelle?
Yes.
Mr. Manero.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker-Rado.
Yes.
Mr. Sealy.
Yes.
Mr. Conti.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mrs. Short.
Yes.
Mr. Corvo.
I'm going to take no part in that one.
Mr. Bowe.
Yes.
Ms. Rico.
Yes.
thank you. Now, as to the issue of the right turn being allowed out of Belleville Avenue, Mr. Del Garcio, very competent gentleman, I happen to know that, but he's talking about backing up all the way up wherever, if somebody's going to make a left turn. He's got no way to prove that. No way. There's no factual circumstance that support what he said. So I don't see how that can be considered. In addition, if I'm making a left turn and I can't make it, I'm not going to stay there all day. I'm going to move and go another way. I'm not going to sit there. Mr. Frantantoni talked about backing out, but we have a 24-foot backup, which is standard requirement throughout Belleville and every other town I've ever appeared from. Mr. Sheldon, he's talking about people cutting through the parking lot. You're not cutting through this parking lot. This is not an easy parking lot to cut through. Will it happen one time or another? Sure. I go to a 7-Eleven in Belleville, in Verona, and I've seen a person cut through. It happens in every location, but that's not a reason to turn this down. The reason for the change is if everybody went out on Union Avenue, the level of service on Union Avenue drops to a D. If the right turns are allowed out of Belleville Avenue, the level of service returns to a C. There are numerous other situations in the town where there's nothing restricted. We have the situation, the biggest one, obviously the Dunkin' Donuts and the gas station, at a busier corner in my opinion, Franklin and Jerome. So this is a much better plan than that. It's better to have the right on Belleville Avenue than have people cross Union Avenue to have to make the turn. Clearly better. The directional aisle, by whoever came up with the idea, it's a great idea. We'll work with, you could make that subject to working with Tom Hurts to make sure it's a mountable curb, so a delivery truck coming in at night would be able to make that. The other thing you have to remember, the traffic here is familiar traffic. People are not going to a 7-Eleven as a destination on a regular basis. They're going there because they go there all the time, they pass by, and they're familiar with it. They're not somebody who's just showing up at the 7-Eleven because they love 7-Elevens. There are people in the area who are completely familiar with that corner. Now, somebody talked about this business model. This is, you can't, the lemon ice just doesn't work. It's a different world. Jackie's, I went to Jackie's all my life. I went to the Sabari people when they had it there. But it's just not there. So you've got a different kind of operation, and we need to make the right turn out to benefit the town, to benefit everything there. I think the board understands the circumstances. I thank you for your time and attention throughout this case from previous and tonight. I appreciate that 3 members read the transcript, so they're ready to hear this. And I think the proof is clear that we should be allowed a right turn out on Belleville. Thank you.
Can you clarify one thing only?
Go ahead, Mr.
Are we still going to allow the left into that driveway from Belleville? So we can make a right out going east on Belleville Avenue, or are we allowing a left in? And if we put that directional island, how are you gonna enter that driveway?
Well, again, if you're talking about for controlling the drivers on the site to only make the right, you can do the half island, I'll draw into it, makes sense. So, I'll do it over here. So if this is the island, you're going to essentially do it this way. So it's essentially a half. So we'll force the traffic in this direction, this would be a standard entrance into the...
You still could have a left turn in, and we clearly cannot give up what we already have and say, no, we'll take no left turns in.
I understand
Clear? So does someone want to make a motion to grant the driveway on Belleville Avenue to be entrance and exit, and the exit would be with the island for a right turn only?
Correct.
And we also like to add the colored cement and the signs.
Yeah. Is that agreeable?
Agreeable.
Someone like to make that motion?
I'll second.
Who made it?
Bo, Mr. Bo,
I said.
Lois, call the roll.
Mr. Venero,
Yes.
Mr. Seeley,
Yes.
Mrs. Enola,
No.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Walsh,
No.
Mrs. Shaw,
No.
Mr. Corba,
Yes.
Mr. Bo,
Yes.
Ms. Rico.
Yes.
Thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks. Will someone make a motion to close the meeting?
Yeah, I need, second hold this.
Go ahead.
The Chandelier parking lot. I brought it up, I think 2 meetings ago, and as you know, well, most of us know, they're parked the cars on there, but they haven't done anything. It's off, there's no fencing, there's no site barrier that we promised the neighbors there would be. There hasn't been any progress, except it's leveling up, but now it's partially a dirt lot. And they're using it for parking. And we approved the parking, but they were going to repair it, and they haven't.
I guess that would be directed to Mr. Lorenzo, right?
Frank?
It's not here.
Oh, all right. Lois, you'll let me know.
I will.
With that said,
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.